All right, we have reached the beginning of the historical era on the Great Plains. And of course, when we're talking American Indian studies, the historical era means time of European contact and afterward, after written records were starting to be kept. By the way, I forgot to introduce you earlier to my teaching assistant, Bob. Say hello, Bob. For now, what I'm going to do, though, is before we start the narrative of the historical events that took place, beginning with this post contact period, I am going to talk for a while about native culture. And there are some things, that vary from tribe to tribe or from region to region. And there are other things that across a region or even across multiple regions and in some cases across all of North America, there are things that some tribes have, most tribes, almost all tribes, in fact, have in common. Kind of like, there's a big difference between, let's say, for example, Scottish culture and Italian culture. But both Scottish and Italian people are also European, and there are some European things that they have in common. So, some of you may have attended or watched some of my previous American Indian Studies courses, some of the other ones that I teach, and even some of my general U.S. history courses, in which I often have this time period where I talk about native culture in general. And so some of this stuff, if you're one of those people, will be perhaps familiar to you. But I'm also going to be focusing in this particular class not just on the stuff that's more general, but also some cultural things that are unique or specific to the plains cultures. So, all that being said, let's begin by talking about native spirituality. It is in discussions of Native American spirituality that basic U.S. history classes in high school and college often kind of get off track and are misrepresentational, usually because the people teaching those classes, though they may be experts in U.S. history and American history, are not experts or sometimes not even that well informed about Native American history or culture. And that's understandable to some extent, although I personally believe that anyone who gets a PhD in U.S. history should also have graduate level work in American Indian studies of some kind, so as to have that understanding and be able to really have both perspectives when they talk about events, because otherwise they're just talking about one point of view. But anyway, I have sat in on basic history courses, sometimes taught by U.S. history professors that I know and like and admire and respect. But when they got to the part about the native culture, sometimes I would cringe because, for example, I heard one person one time talking about how the European colonists didn't understand the Indians because the native people worshipped trees, and that's a misrepresentation. If you ever watched the HBO series Deadwood, the Western series, which is absolutely a great show, but it takes place in the Dakota Territory in the late 1870s, and there are lots of representations of the Americans, the white Americans in particular, and their prejudices against Indians. And one of the characters, Al Swearingen, the extremely crude and foul-mouthed owner of the saloon, refers to Indians throughout that series as dirt worshippers, which is not only misrepresentational, but is intentionally so as to be insulting, which is not, not the intention of the writers and directors of the TV show, but it's what they were trying to portray about the prejudices of white people at the time. All that being said, let's take a look at some of the things that many of those Plains tribes had in common, and in fact, that they had in common with tribes all around North America. Now, most tribes had an idea of a creator spirit, of a principal deity. And that deity took different forms and obviously had different names, often had male characteristics, sometimes was represented as a female figure. Most often in references to native peoples made by non-native peoples, both at that time and presently, you would hear the term Great Spirit, especially if you watch old westerns. The Great Spirit is telling us, etc., etc. And in some ways, that too is not necessarily a misrepresentation, slight mistranslation of the Lakota term Wakantanka. Now, Tonka means something really big. Wakan means something mysterious, sacred, holy, inexplicable. But it's something, it's a mystery, right? So rather than the Great Spirit, meaning the great big spirit in the sky, what the Lakotas actually were, and those who are traditionalists still are saying, is the great mystery. So that's the meaning of Wakantanka, great mystery. Now, other tribes, even in the plains, clearly had different words in their own language that meant different things, like the man above, for example. But let's take a look at the cosmology of the Lakotas in particular, just as kind of an example for what we're talking about. So Wakantanka, the Great Spirit. Also, by the way, referred to as Tunkashila, which means grandfather. And we'll get to the meaning of that in a moment. So there was the belief among all the tribes that there was spiritual power that suffused everything. Everything is a part of the great living force of the universe, so that it is like a spider web in which everything is connected, and that spiritual power could also be viewed as, and we've talked about this before, back when we were talking about the archaic era, the idea that there are different levels of worlds, right? There's a spirit world that is very similar to, or maybe even identical to, our own, where if you have the knowledge, you can tap into that. You can tap into the spiritual power of it. You can walk in two worlds and learn things in that spirit world that you can apply to the earthly world. And in that sense, everything is connected. Everything's part of this big living universe. It sounds kind of hokey to make this comparison, but it's almost like, and I don't know how nerdy you are, probably not as nerdy as I am, it's kind of like how the Force is described in Star Wars, right? This great energy field that binds everything, and everything is connected to. So European colonists could look at someone participating in that belief structure and say, oh, look at them, they're worshiping trees. Or look at them, they're worshiping the dirt, which is not true. They were acknowledging that all things, living and non-living, were connected and were a part of that spiritual force. So this idea that everything is connected like a spider web means, well, we'll get into a little bit later about what that means so far as balance. but it means everything is connected together. There is an expression in Lakota that is often used, can often be heard at powwows and various other types of Native American events where a lot of Lakota terminology gets used sort of in a pan-Indian way by other tribes, some of which, have lost access and knowledge of their own native languages. But this expression, mitakoye oyasin, which literally means all my relations, and what that signifies, another way of saying that is we're all related. Everything is my relative. Not just every person, but everything is my relative. We are all ultimately kin. Now, all these tribes had a concept of a creator force, a creator spirit. Most of them also had sort of other levels of spiritual beings that were in between humans and the great mystery, the Wakantanka of the Lakotas. And again, that differs from tribe to tribe, from culture to culture. But among the Lakotas, some that we can look at, Mapia Ate, the Sky Father, Ina Maka, Mother Earth. And then there are also very significant, very important to the Lakotas, and this is true of most of the other plains tribes and many tribes outside that area. The four winds, Tate Topa, four winds or four cardinal directions, and also the powers, or the six powers, Shakpe Uye, literally six directions. So the six directions are those four winds, the four directions, north, south, east, and west, and also up and down, which, again, we talked about a little bit from way back in the Archaic period. So among the Lakotas, you've got those four directions. Father Sky, Mother Earth below us make up the six powers. Now, the Creator Spirit, not known to the Lakotas as the Father, as is true to some other tribes, and was certainly true to the Europeans of the Christian tradition, that God is the Father, the Creator is the Father. Here the Creator is the Grandfather. So in that sense, the Grandfather, Tunkashila, created the earth and the sky, Father Earth and Mother Sky. So the sky and the earth are our parents, directly created by the great Creator. And the sun shining on the soil and creating life is metaphorically Father Earth making love, Father Sky making love to Mother Earth and creating life as a result of that union, which, is photosynthesis, which is not nearly as poetic or romantic a way to refer to it, but it's essentially the same idea. All right. Well, I want to talk about this imagery, which again is something we've talked about before, that sort of originated among those early woodland period cultures in at first Ohio, and then spread through the Adena and the Hopewell and later Mississippian to other regions and other areas. This image of a circle with a cross or a plus sign inside it. And I did kind of quickly tell you the meaning of that when we were talking about it earlier, and the fact that it appears all throughout the American South, tribes of the South and the Midwest, and up into the Great Plains. So the four arms of that cross represent the four directions, or the four winds, Tate Topa. Various tribes also can ascribe color schemes which differ from tribe to tribe so far as that image, or no color scheme at all. What you see there in the middle in color are three examples of the Lakota imagery and explanation for that circle, which is called was called by the Lakotas the sacred hoop. So each of those arms represents a different cardinal direction and therefore a different power of the universe, and each color represents something different. Now, in the book Black Elk Speaks, Black Elk, a Lakota medicine man, talked about this imagery and what it meant, and he ascribed to, in addition to its traditional meaning, that you've got the four colors representing the four races of mankind. That was not in place when these things were first used, because the native people hadn't met any white people or African or Asian people. The colors, in that sense and traditionally, represent, and by the way, these four directions aren't necessarily laid out the way that they would be on a compass. That's important to be aware of. So the four colors are white, red, yellow, and either navy blue or black, which to some tribes were the same, different shades of the same color. So the white arm represents the north, and that represents peace and purity. And when I think about that, I think about one of my favorite experiences in life is to be in the woods during or right after a snowfall. And if you can just imagine that, the snow on the ground in the forest, everything is blanketed in that snow, and all the sounds are muffled, and it has an incredibly peaceful and pure feeling that is attached to it. The yellow represents the south, and that represents, and again, this is to the Lakota, that represents health, physical well-being. The red represents the east, the place where the dawn star, which has a reddish hue to it, is. And the east and red mean wisdom. The dark blue or black, that represents the west, which to the Lakotas and many other tribes is the home of the thunder beings. It represents spiritual power, which, because so much of life to indigenous peoples was not distinguishable between the sacred and the mundane, the daily sort of activities and the things that were spiritual, because everything was both at the same time. No matter what you're doing, you're going to probably want to have spiritual power to be successful at it. So, with any of these things, if you were praying for some of these things to be added to your life, if you were particularly wanting to gain wisdom, there's something you want to figure out, there's something you want to know or understand, then you would pray to the east. You would face the east. You would offer smoke, tobacco smoke from a pipe, to the east when asking for that wisdom. If you want improved, if you're sick, you want to get better, pray to the south, right? If you are wanting spiritual power, if you're going to be going to war, you're going to want spiritual power, then you would face the west. Or just in your daily prayers, you would offer your prayers to float up on the smoke to all four directions, and to the sky, and to the earth, and to the grandfather. You add the grandfather in there, and you got that number 7 that we talked about earlier as being significant to many tribes. So this is known as a sacred hoop. Sometimes it's also called a medicine wheel, and this has become more and more frequent in recent years. and it can be confusing because an actual medicine wheel is one of these things made of stone. Which is not to say sacred hoops are not actual medicine wheels. It's common enough that meaning becomes ascribed, right? But when talking about medicine wheels in the sense of archaeology, anthropology, native studies, we're talking about one of these things, which is very similar to the sacred hoop, because you've got a circle connecting everything. You have usually, almost always, a cairn, a stack of rocks in the center, and it looks like a wagon wheel. And you've got the spokes coming out from that wheel, connected by the circle. And these things can be found throughout the northern plains in Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and up into Canada, quite a few of them in Canada. And they're ancient. They have been in place for countless centuries, if not longer than that. And spiritual power is ascribed to them still by traditionalist native people. Archaeologists are uncertain why they were originally made or what they signify, but it's kind of like some of the other stone structures around the world from the ancient periods. We can pretty well guess that this was a site where ceremony was conducted, and that there are deep spiritual meanings to the layout of these wheels. And it has been speculated by some that there are also astrological meanings, that the arms of these circles can perhaps help to predict or identify certain astronomical occurrences or events, which then become important in the season of ceremonies. Another circular thing, a hoop type of thing that people associate with American Indians, is this thing, which I bet you've all seen before. It's called, in English, a dream catcher. And I'm sure you've seen it, and I'm sure you've heard the story of what this is. It's a thing that you, sort of a charm that you place above your bed to catch the bad dreams. And it's probably been described to you as a Native American thing. Now, as you travel around the country, you stop by gift shops anywhere in the country that there are any ties at all to recent Native history, which is everywhere in the country, right? You're going to see these things for sale, and you're going to see them ascribed as being part of the culture of whatever tribe is native to that region. You're in Tennessee, where I am. You stop by one of these truck stops, and you'll see these things being sold as Cherokee items. You know, if you were in New Mexico, they may be being sold as Navajo or Pueblo items. And in reality, they sort of got adopted in the 1960s and 70s by kind of the pan-Indian movement, and then sort of migrated to the general consciousness through New Age practitioners, so that by the 1980s, that's when you started seeing them everywhere. The reality is that this is a Native American thing that's just means just what it says, what you've heard. But they were not ubiquitous. They were not universal all over the country. In fact, it was the Ojibwe in the Great Lakes region and up into Canada who had these things as a part of their culture. And it was specifically something that you would make called a dream catcher, or called a spider charm, because it looks like a web. Remember what I said about everything being connected? It looks like a web, and so it's there to catch, to catch any of the evil aura, evil energy and placed above the cradles of little children, babies, infants, and toddlers, so as to protect them. So that's the Ojibwe, and I think they were used to some extent among the Cree, who were neighbors of the Ojibways and were also speakers of an Algonquin language, Anishinaabe language. And it's kind of become sort of like connected to everybody. But now you know the specifics. Because I do know some Native people who are ticked off that everyone assumes that they grew up with a dream catcher over their head when that's not their culture. All these things, though, the spider web there, and in particular, those sacred hoops that we saw, are indicative of the extreme importance of balance. Everything is connected, mitakuye oyasin, like a spider web. And that's why balance is so important, because if you disturb one strand of a spider web, what happens? The whole web is disturbed. The whole web is potentially damaged. So you have to be very, very aware of the consequences of your actions at all times, because it affects all your relations, which is everything around you. This is something that really is a universal concept among indigenous peoples in the Americas, the importance of maintaining that balance. And that's why perhaps you've heard the expression that Native people look at the potential repercussions of actions down to the seventh generation in the future, and they look back 7 generations to the past, because everything is connected. And this makes Native people perhaps more serious stewards when they're adhering to the traditional ways of the environment, of the world around them. Now we're going to look at some ways in which that importance of balance wound up becoming a part of culture in other ways, including in gathering food, whether it's hunting or gathering or fishing. And we're going to look at a word here that is an Algonquin word, Manitou, that you will find. And remember, we looked at that map of where Algonquin-related languages are spoken, and it was a big, huge area of the United States. So this concept and even similar pronunciations of the word Manitou were pretty common. Manitou is the spirit of an animal. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the individual spirit of, say, an individual raccoon, but rather the raccoon spirit that sort of looks over all the raccoons and is an embodiment, an incarnation of the spirit world and life of all the raccoons. So the Manitou is a very important concept to those Algonquin language tribes. And there's similar, maybe not the same word, but the same idea, right? The same idea among all the Plains tribes and virtually all the tribes in North America. And it gets connected to this concept that anthropologists have called ordained killing. So what is ordained killing? It has to do with hunting. So the idea is everything is connected. Everything is a part of that web of life. As cheesy as it might sound, because Disney has Disneyfied this concept, the circle of life, right? Well, if you're a hunter and you are having to provide for your family and you're out hunting and you see a deer, this idea that, again, most tribes had, that is translated into, Western culture with the concept of ordained killing. The idea is every living thing plays its part, right? It's like a food chain of life. So when you are hunting to feed your family and you are out there in the woods and you see a deer and you take a shot with your bow. As that arrow is whistling toward the deer, in the last moment before that arrow strikes, that deer recognizes and understands his fate, his place that he has to play in the circle. He is now playing his role of providing life for other living things. So, with that understanding, that the animal has that understanding, and this is something that, as all related things, as all pieces on the same spider web, the hunter and the animal, the hunter and the prey, are equal. They're even. It's not a matter of the hunter, because he is human, being superior to the animal, and therefore the animal being his possession to do with as he pleases. No, it's a fellow living thing to which he is equal. So, it's very important when you are hunting to feed your family that you are hunting to feed your family. Not for just the thrill of it, not for sport, not because it's fun, and not to be done wantonly. You only kill something if you have to have it to feed your family and to survive. So therefore, you express then your gratitude to that animal and to the spirit of that animal, the spirit that guards over all of the different individuals of that animal family. And you have to perform certain rituals that express your gratitude, your thankfulness, and your regret. You know, I'm sorry that I had to kill you, but I have to feed my family. It's the roles that we play. And I am deeply appreciative that you played your part, that you played your role, and did so at the end willingly. And this ritual is very important because it's polite. You have to be polite to the things that you kill, the animals that you kill. If you are not, it could cause problems. So you also have the understanding, as the human hunter, yes, I am playing my part, and particularly now that we're talking about the Plains tribes. Remember I talked earlier about some of the funeral rites of many of the Plains tribes, which is not to bury their dead under the ground, but to put them up on scaffolds in a high place, so that the birds and animals and so forth get to them, because now it's your turn. And if you're buried in the ground, it's the same thing. It's your turn to play your role in sustaining that web of life, that circle of life. Now, if you are not polite, by which I mean you don't do those rituals, you don't ceremonially apologize and thank this animal, or you just go out and kill a bunch of animals that you don't need to survive for the fun of it, you are going to anger, from the Algonquin way of thinking of it, the Manitou of that animal, the spirit of that animal. And the animals, if they're not treated respectfully, you know, they realize that this is their role, but if you don't treat them respectfully, then you will be punished. And because these tribes are tribal, that means that there's not as much individual responsibility for things as there is communal or community responsibility. So the punishment might come on you, but it might come on your family, or it might come on your village, or it might come on your band or your tribe. And that punishment, according to the cosmology of many tribes, is various diseases. So if you just wantonly go around killing snakes for no reason, and then you are not polite about it, according to, I think, the Cherokees, the belief was that you're going to get rheumatism because that's what the snake spirit's going to give you. there's a story among the Cherokees specifically, but also this concept, I think, was pretty common, also among the Plains tribes, that the plants, the plant life, the plant spirits, kind of come in to play their role. They feel sorry for humans who make just unintentional mistakes and then get punished by the spirits of animals by various afflictions. So they kind of counter that by providing cures for certain afflictions, which is why certain plants are good for medically treating certain things. So again, it's all a circle and it's all connected.